Guys, I've got something to show you. So little sneaky preview for my Patreon supporters. So first up, I've just finished filming a video review of Mike Lodes' really cool new book called Warbows. But you can see that on the public channel. I'm just going to be editing that in a minute's time. But I've had something arrive today. Now, you know that I like bayonets, you know that I like the butt and the point, but you know probably also that I have an SMLE or Lee Enfield fencing bayonet, essentially bayonet trainer, from the period, from 1916. And what I've been trying to get hold of for a while is an earlier Victorian version. Now, they're very hard to come by. The World War I versions are quite numerous because of course World War I was huge and colossal amounts of military equipment was produced around World War I because of the Great War. But Victorian ones, number one, they were more dispersed around the empire and they were churned out over a much wider period of time, but also they're older and they seem to have been used to oblivion, so used until they broke and then thrown away. So there are just fewer of them around, but I managed to get one. So this is a Martini Henry practice bayonet. So what is that? Well, if you've seen the other one, it's basically the same. So you'll notice obviously it has a blunt end with a rod, and the rod has a spring that goes inside the barrel. So here we go. Let me stab myself with a bayonet. There we go. So it's like one of those comedy daggers that they have in theatres. But you'll see that the rifle comprises the parts of a Martini Henry, and in fact these are real Martini Henry parts. I've never really, so I've seen these in museums, I've seen them in photographs, seen them in books, but I've never really been up close and personal with one before because there just aren't many of them around. It is really hard to get hold of them. But what I didn't really appreciate until I started looking at the markings on this, and I'll talk a little bit more about the markings in a second, is that these are actual rifle parts. They're not specially made as a practice bayonet. That is an actual Martini Henry barrel, and that is an actual Martini Henry breech, and these are real stock parts. That is a real butt. That's a real butt cap. And what's interesting about that, of course, is because they bear the markings of a real rifle. So, talking about the markings, so. On this side, I can only just make them out, but one of the reasons I'm giving you a preview of this is what I intend to do, because I think it would be a nice thing because this is a relatively rare object, but also it needs some degree of restoration. It's not in bad condition, in fact it's in good condition, but it's never had anything done to it. And I want to bring it up to where it should be, basically. So I thought this would be a really nice and different restoration piece to go through on the public channel with, because normally I do restoration on things like swords and knives, and this is a little bit different because obviously it has some it is a gun. I was going to say it has some relationship to restoring guns, but it is actually a gun. It is actually a rifle. But you'll notice that there are some obviously changes. That's the obvious one. It's had a plunger, spring plunger inserted in the barrel with this special retaining section here to stop it flying out the end. And the breech, which is a real Martini breech, you'll see it's blocked at top and bottom with a block of wood. That's right. There is just simply a block of walnut, the same wood that the stock is made of, cut and inserted and pinned via, so they've taken the screws out that would normally hold the breech door, essentially, in there. They've taken those out and they've put pins in that hold this block of wood in, basically. And they're actually wooden pegs as well, looking at them. Yeah, so I'm essentially going to take this apart sympathetically and clean it on camera. So it should be fairly interesting, especially as I'm not 100% certain about how it goes together and how it comes apart. But I do have a Martini Henry and I have serviced it. So one of the, so I do know a few things about how these are put together. But one of the issues with this is the stock, you'll notice, is wiggly. Okay, and the reason is, we'll just go up to it here. If you look there, you can see. So inside here is a really long bolt. Now I believe that it should be, if it was like with the real rifle, I take off that screw and I take off that screw, take the butt cap off, and there should be a recessed hole with a essentially a really long bolt, like a screw, going all the way down and screwing into the back of the breech there. And all I need to do is stick my screwdriver in, tighten it up, and then put the butt cap back on. But that's not always as simple as it sounds, because over the years these bits of metal can kind of almost adhere to the wood around them. So what you have to do is you have to score around it carefully and carefully remove it so you don't end up losing chunks of wood or this kind of stuff, because obviously this is fairly old. Now, talking about those markings, so the reason I digressed there was because the markings at the moment are not fully visible, but when I clean it up they will be. But I can see some of the markings. So number one, I can see that this is a Martini Henry Mark II. So I can see the number 2 there. I also recognise it's a Mark II from the shape of it. So if it was a Mark IV, it would have a more more of a shoulder on the breech there. But it has the shape of the Mark I and the Mark II. And I can also see that this was made by BSA, the British Small Arms company, who obviously famously went on to make motorbikes later after the Second World War. After the First World War, in fact, I think. And it's got a date that appears to be, well, it's definitely 1880 something, but I'm not sure 1880 what. So basically I'm going to clean all these parts. I can see that there are proof marks on the barrel, indicating that this is a real gun barrel that at some point was proofed as a gun barrel. So there are proof markings on the barrel, there and there. There's another one up on the breech up here. There's a VR sort of crossed flags symbol on this side, and various other markings. So very, very interesting. I would say that this has been used, this practice bayonet, because there's not that much damage on it, in fact very little damage, but this part of the stock unusually is very bruised and battered. So the walnut of the forestock is all, it looks like someone's been bashing it with a stick or maybe even a light hammer, something like that. And that is completely indicative of someone who's been using it against another one in this kind of fencing encounter, because the rest of the stock isn't battered around like that, but the forestock is, and that's the bit you'd expect to receive that kind of abuse. Anyway, I'm really, really stoked to have this, because this is the practice bayonet of the period of the sabre sources and bayonet sources that I study. So it's wonderful to have one of these. I have no hopes of ever being able to get a reconstruction made of one of these, because I think it would just cost ludicrous amounts. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a company that, I mean, there is a company in America that's starting to make replica Martini Henrys in modern calibers, because the original Martini Henry is in obsolete caliber 45-577. So possibly one of those companies could make components for it, and then we could get someone else to make the plunger section for it. I also note, interestingly, I find it's kind of funny that the end, to me, is safer and nicer than the later period World War I SMLE practice one, which honestly is a little bit brutal, I think. But we do know that sometimes they tied a kind of leather padded bag around the end of these to make them hit a little bit less brutally. So there we go, preview, Martini Henry fencing musket. And it's a rare thing, and I'm super stoked to have got one, because it very much fits into my collection of Victorian martial training stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for another Patreon video. And yes, and that Warbows book review from Mike Loads' book, be sure to check that out on the main channel. Even if you just want to have a look inside the book and aren't going to buy it, it's worth watching the review, I think, because you get to see through quite a lot of the book in that review. Anyway, cheers for watching and see you soon.